Let's get further information now, speak about the situation in West Africa, bring into the conversation international relations and national security analyst Fidel Amakye Owusu. Good to have you on the SABC this evening. So you've got ECOWAS basically now speaking about a state of emergency in West Africa, but is that description apt? And what options are available to the regional bloc as far as trying to stabilize the situation?
Yeah, so usually state of emergencies are declared by states or countries rather than regions. So this really is more of an anomaly. It shows that this is a situation that is overwhelming. And yes, if all the member states of ECOWAS have agreed that there should be a state of emergency, then I would say that this is a collective state of emergency, so-called. And it is akin to what happened in the GCC countries, in the Gulf states, during the Arab Spring. You realize that whereas Egypt, Libya, Syria, and other countries were on fire and the population had turned the countries upside down, the GCC countries, namely Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, and Kuwait, implemented what we call the collective security thing and declared what is could be called state of emergency for the region. And wherever they saw protest, they went there to quench it for different reasons from what we are experiencing in West Africa. But I think that we've never seen this, and it shows the enormity of the situation.
So if this is an indication of the enormity of the problem and one that ECOWAS takes seriously, in the region at the moment, what can be done to ensure political stability and the highest security level possible? Because when you listen to Omar Touray or read his remarks today, he's in fact said what's happened in the recent days shows basically the importance of serious introspection on the future of democracy in the region and the need to invest in security.
Yes, so a few weeks ago, we saw a coup d'etat in Guinea. This was during an election, and apparently there's a suspicion of collusion between the outgone president or the ousted president and the military junta that came in. That took ECOWAS by surprise because ECOWAS had its election representatives and delegation in the country when that thing happened. And eventually, former President Goodluck Jonathan and a former national security advisor from Ghana were all trapped in the country until the military opened the doors for them to leave the country. Now, few weeks forward, we see what just happened in Benin. And then the whole thing is that, well, after 2020, when Mali first experienced coup, we've seen one in Guinea, Mali repeated it, we've seen another in Burkina Faso, and then in Niger. It is becoming more prolific and it is becoming more common for the military to remove civilian government, and that is not sitting well with the region.
And yes, coups are not necessarily a new occurrence in West Africa over the various decades, but in the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years, what has made the ground in West Africa so fertile for attempts to overthrow or indeed successfully overthrow governments?
Yeah, so after the Cold War, most of the military regimes started transition, and they drafted new constitutions to return many of these countries to civilian rule, including my own country, Ghana. Benin was the first to actually take that step, ironically. And we also saw that in Mali and many other countries in West Africa after the Cold War, because we had a unipolar global system which was promoting liberal institutions and democracy. And so if you were not liberal or democratic, you were not going to get the attention of the global system. After decades, the situation has changed. We've seen China becoming very powerful, and China is not a democracy. We've seen Russia reasserting its rule. After the Cold War, Moscow had kind of coiled back into its shell because it was more concentrated or concentrating its effort in Europe and its own territory that was crumbling. But currently, Moscow is also asserting its influence in Africa. And when people stage coup, they get the support of these countries somehow, because China does not necessarily support the coup d'etats, but when they are staged, they recognize the government and they work with them. Russia actually gives them security backing. and this has really enhanced the kind of legitimacy that these coup makers get these days, and that is also moving. But there's another aspect: the history of the region. If you check the coups, majority of the countries are francophone. So the post-colonial French arrangements with these colonies were not also so favorable. It looked like even though France was not physically holding them by the neck, most of the arrangements and most of the relationship looked like France was backing civilian leaders who were dictators to suppress the population. And some of these populations have blamed France for the abject poverty that they find themselves. And that has also fueled the kind of support that these coup makers have from the population.
So are these coups, including the latest one in Benin over the weekend, are they actions that are basically fermented entirely domestically, or are there elements of foreign influence for whatever benefit? And if so, where would that come from?
Yes, in the past years, we've seen increasing disinformation and misinformation in the region. There is this narrative of Russia being the savior and Putin being very wanting to save Africans as against some Western influence that is there to oppress. So that narrative is there, and much of it is not really factual. But I mean, when that message is sold, people buy it because I mean, this is a region where people are quite desperate. Poverty is widespread, and people think that the politicians are exploiting them. Yes, some countries are doing very well in the region, like Ghana, Senegal, Nigeria, not that bad. Even Benin is not too bad. But by and large, these are developing countries with so much of their many of their populations under the poverty line. And so this disinformation and misinformation often by Russia and other sources really feed into this. There are several videos you see that are not accurate. We've vetted some of these things, and as security practitioners in the private sector, some of these things are very worrying, and it could be one of the reasons this state of emergency has been declared.
And just to come back to this state of emergency, the language that's coming out of the meeting held in the region today, again, I'm on the point of what difference it's likely to make, because as you're saying, there are socioeconomic realities, right, that are faced by the populations of these countries, people who are poor. Some of these countries are dealing with corruption problems as well. So while those exist, there could be genuine frustration among the population, but there could also be manipulation by people in parts of the military, for example, to further their own agendas. So what responsibility does a regional body like ECOWAS bear to help to deal with the very real issues, the afflictions of the populations in these countries to make sure that they're not taken advantage of and used to further other agendas?
Yeah, so where the coup started was the Sahel region, and the Sahel had a lot of insecurity problems. There is a very dangerous terror organization known as JNIM that is affiliated with Al Qaeda, and in the past years, it has been gaining territory upon territory. And in recent days, it has really imposed a blockade on the Malian capital of Bamako. So increasingly, even in Burkina Faso, the capital is increasingly being isolated by these extremists. There are instances where transportation companies have had to cut deals with these extremists in order to have passage through these countries or ply the roads, because without that, they were actually going to attack these vehicles. So you look at all these things and you realize that apart from even the poverty, there is a spreading insecurity. And these terrorists are increasingly moving towards coastal states. And so it is a mix of very precarious and volatile dynamics that has collectively made the region, put the region in this situation. Now, in the issue of Benin, if you listen to the coup maker, he was more like, well, the government is supporting a colonialist agenda and all those kind of things. And this is mainly propagated by disinformation and misinformation, because Benin remains an independent state. Yes, it has some relationship with France and other external actors, but it is not as bad as it is painted by the coup makers.
Good to talk to you, Fidel Amakye Owusu, an international relations and national security analyst, speaking to us about the coups in West Africa, the latest one being in Benin over the weekend. That was foiled, an attempted coup. Now we're hearing from the high levels of ECOWAS, Omar Touray, saying the situation in the region, West Africa, basically amounts to a state of emergency.